Okay, welcome to Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Today is Tuesday, and it's October 20th, 2020, the second day of Cheshvan. And today what we're going to start with is yesterday we discussed the Torah reading of the week, and as I mentioned, we're going to, so to speak, segue into other subjects and ideas to be able to discuss and make our lunch break different items and topics that we can always learn different ideas. So we're going to stick with learning and studying the book of Genesis on Mondays, so you know the Torah reading that's coming up of the week, and on Thursdays and Fridays to have a better idea of what the Torah reading of that week is going to be. However, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and maybe sometimes Thursdays, we're going to start a new subject, which is not so new, but it's going not such a one subject either. But we're going to try to dispel myths and mysteries of Judaism, whether it's in the Torah or general ideas. And in general, if anybody has any questions or comments or suggestions, as I always say, please send them in. And if they are not on our list of mythbusters, then we will get to it and address it as well. This is a good segue into what we usually are going to start in November 10th on our JLI course, and I encourage you all to sign up. You can either do it in person or online, which will be Secrets of the Bible, Finding Out Deeper Stories into the Torah. That will start for 6 Tuesdays, our course. That's jewishali.com/JLI fall. And you can sign up to our new JLI course starting November 10th for 6 Tuesdays. So, what we're going to start today with our Mythbusters and myths and mysteries in the Torah, we're going to start on something which is very obvious in front of the eyes. One of the most read books in humanity, more than any other, translated approximately into 2,500 different languages. An estimated billion copies have been rolled out, which shows us that this is a probably very important book. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It is the Bible. The Bible, the Torah, is one of the most famous read books. But ask any person, what is the Torah? What is the Torah? Translate. If I were to ask you, what is the Bible? What is it? Some people will tell you laws. Some people will tell you, and the most common answer is the history of the Jewish people. And I'm here to let you know today that it's absolutely neither of those. It is not the history of the Jewish people. Take, for example, usually a history book would be written in order. One of the basic principles of the Torah is that there is no before and after in the Torah. The Torah was not written in chronological order because the Torah, by definition, is not a history book. An interesting thing you'll find in Hebrew, the word history doesn't exist. In the modern Hebrew language, the word history is called historia, which is taken from the word history. But if you take the word history, it's split up into two words, his story, which telling us that the Torah, the Bible, is not somebody else's story. It's our story. And therefore, the Torah, number one important rule of thumb of the Torah is it's contemporary. The Torah is not something that was written 3,000 years ago and we're trying to weave our way into it. On the contrary, the Torah is a practical contemporary application to our day-to-day life. The Torah teaches us every single day what we can do, how do we do it, and guides us not only in our spiritual matters, but even in our physical matters. Here's a story for you, just to give a little example. The fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, was once getting ready to prepare for his meal. And as he was preparing, his younger brother, his name was Rabbi Nachum Mendel, came to him and said, look at this amazing thing scientists found. That when you bend your head forward, it is used to concentrate. And when you want to remember something, you look back. And that is because in the back of your head, there's a little bone, a little vein, a little nerve that helps you concentrate when it's leaning forward and helps you remember when you lean backwards. Amazing, astonishing. The fifth Chabad Rebbe takes his time, walks over to the bookshelf, takes out a book of discourses from the second Chabad Rebbe, which was written 100 years prior, opens it up, and shows them in a Hasidic discourse where it talks about the discussion about this little vein in the back of your neck, which helps you decide if you're going to be more in depth or you're going to remember. And he looks at his brother and says, wow, you must be amazed. Maybe the second Chabad Rebbe was a doctor. Maybe he was ahead in degree in philosophy, but he also knew biology. And the fifth Chabad Rebbe explained to him, no. The Torah is a blueprint of this world. Everything that is in this world had to come from the Torah. Therefore, everything we find in this world today exists within the realm of Torah. And therefore, whatever happens in any discovery we can find, it's mentioned in the Torah someplace, some way, somehow. To take it a step further, and here's another myth buster. Any person who thinks that science is a conflict with Judaism and Torah and knowledge in God either doesn't know science or doesn't know Judaism. Because the Torah is the blueprint of the world, everything that exists in science exists in the Torah. The only difference is maybe science hasn't yet come to the full discovery, so therefore they're still in hypothesis stage, but Torah has it as a fact. So when we study Torah, the Torah is not just an old age book given to Moses 3,333 years ago on Mount Sinai, and only was relevant for then because it doesn't talk about a car, it doesn't talk about anything else, seemingly of modern technology, but on the contrary. The Torah is a living organism. The Torah is something which continuously is teaching us and helping us guide our life from the most spiritual aspirations to the most physical decision. Because within the Torah, everything is written. So step number one, though I look at the Torah and it looks like it is limited by chapters and verses of what it may be, I have to know, number one, it is not a history book. It is not the history of the Jews for the very fact that it is not in chronological order. You can open up the first chapter of Genesis, as we discussed last week. The first chapter of Genesis, chapter 11, has more in it than chapter 41, and it goes back and forth. Same thing in the book of Exodus. It goes back and forth. Plus 2 years, minus 2 years, goes back and forth. Clearly to tell us that the Torah is not a history book. But even more so, that all of the Torah, most of it that discovers, that talks about it, the first 52 chapters covers only 2,447 years. While the next 145 chapters of the Torah only discuss 3 years of the Jewish people's time. So you see the imbalance if it was to be a history book. The Torah tells us about many historical events. So you may say, why does it then tell us historical events if it's not a history book, if it's supposed to teach us lessons? It is because, as we've seen from our classes that we have every single day at lunch break, every single one of those historical events, as we discussed yesterday, the story of Noah, and last week the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and the story of the tree of knowledge, any story that is there is not a story of the past, but is a story of the present. Is a story of how we can enhance our lives, how we can become better people and cultivate a better relationship with God. So all of these stories are specifically out of order to teach us that this is not about a story or an incident that Judaism wants to tell us about an event that happened in the past, but more so an event in our life that we have to relive. Let's take even one of the greatest events that are recorded in the Torah, the story of Egypt. The Jews' exodus of Egypt. The Talmud tells us that one who does not experience the exodus of Egypt every single day is as if he never left Egypt. That means the story of Egypt is not just a physical episode in a story that happened with the Jewish people, but every single day of our life that we live as free Jews and experience the teachings of the Torah, we are experiencing an exodus of Egypt. It's an event that continues to occur, not a one-time event. All of these stories in the Torah as well. Whether it's Abraham leaving his land, Abraham believing in monotheism, anything of these stories is all there to teach us a lesson. And for that reason, the word Torah means hora'ah, lesson. Because every single thing the Torah guides us in our path, as the Maral of Prague uses the terminology, the Torah guides people along the path they must take to reach their greater potential. It is therefore appropriately called Torah, which implies guidance. So I leave you with this thought today. And tomorrow we're going to go into further detail of taking different episodes in the Torah, talking about their true story and what their application is in our day-to-day life. So we're going to go through many different myths and mysteries, not only in the Torah, but in Judaism in general, certain mitzvot. And we're going to call this Mythbusters, if you want to call it, or fascinating facts in Judaism that we will talk about, seeing how the stories of the Torah, apply to our day-to-day life in Kurds, and that's what we discuss anytime we talk about the Torah reading of the week. But we're going to look more into certain stories, how sometimes they got them wrong because of mistranslations, misinterpretations, and whatever it may be. So thank you for joining us today with our lunch break with the Rabbi as we continue to explore these fascinating facts in Judaism, and we continue to learn that everything in life, especially as we study the Torah, will guide us in making us more productive and happier lives. Wishing you the very best for a productive day and a prosperous day. See you tomorrow at 1 p.m.